Tonight, my guest is Mr. Ryan Mauro. He's the guy that, honestly, I told him earlier, I said, listen, I'm kind of jealous. You've obviously done some things that I think are pretty cool, and I would just love to kind of follow in your footsteps with some of these discoveries, some of these things you've done. He's got a bachelor's degree in intelligence studies, a master's degree in political science. He's got a graduate certificate in Middle East studies. It's interesting. He's on the news. He's had lots of appearances, really talking about kind of what's going on in the Islamic world and how we're dealing with that and things like that. So I'm really excited about that. And he's here tonight because he is somebody who has been to the mountain of God. The whole point of our ministry is we tell people that you really can have answers, and you should have answers. You see, if you're confused, you're going to lose, and the people around you are going to lose, but it really doesn't have to be that way. You can have answers, and you really should, because someone's eternity is at stake, and eternity is just way too long to be wrong. So we want you to have answers. Matter of fact, if this is the only thing you get out of tonight, and I know you'll get more, write down this website, searchcreation.org. Searchcreation.org. It indexes the top 43 websites on creation versus evolution and apologetics and science, and lets you find great answers. We call it Google without the junk, and it lets you have incredible opportunities to search the truth there. In life, there's 4 basic questions you're going to ask. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? And the biggest question we need to ask after that is, what in the world am I going to do while I live? And you answer that based on the way you answer those other 4 questions, which is why I think studying the truth of God's word is so important, including the fact that it's really true. And that's what Mount Sinai is really all about. Ryan, how you doing tonight, bud?
I'm doing all right. Thanks so much for having me with your event today, and for being able to reach your supporters like this and be able to talk about it. I don't actually get to talk about this too often, so when I get to, I really enjoy it. For the first time in history, outsiders can now go to where we believe by far is the most likely real Mount Sinai, and get this, all those stories about the Saudi police keeping people out, maybe you can get in and see something, but not see all of it. That's all in the past now. We go there, and Saudi police usually is with us, and you get to see all of it, and you get to see all of it safely if you go with our group, because it's all prearranged, and you also get to experience Saudi Arabia a little bit in a safe environment. How about that? So not too many people thought they'd be able to even experience that. So you get to go to Saudi Arabia, and you also get to see these amazing archaeological sites and interact with the locals who in that area actually would love to see you.
But I want to back up and go, can you just give me the couple minute overview of how in the world did you get involved in this and in intelligence studies and being an expert on everything going? It's like you've done a lot of stuff, and this is a pretty interesting topic. How did all this start?
It's nuts. And I look back on it, and now I can see how God was putting pieces together into a puzzle, and it's not a puzzle I would ever think I'd be a part of, but I get it a little bit now. So I wasn't raised in like a religious background. So going into the faith, I was extremely cynical. I mean, I like the concept of heaven because, what's there not to like about heaven, right?
That's right.
But it wasn't until I was, I think, 11 or 12 that I became a Christian, and really went to church for the first time. And I did so with a lot of resistance. I wanted no part of it. But it grew over time, and I largely owe that to my own cynicism.
So you're so analytical that you're just kind of like, I just got to really, if there's any doubt, you got to figure that out.
Right. And that's fun for me. And it's just how my brain works. So it's not something I'm ashamed of, because that self-scrutiny that I have to this really ridiculously annoying obsessive degree is why I do a lot of research. And when I put something out there, you can know I didn't just do it on a whim. And going through that process, especially through my teenage years, my faith got stronger, because as I had more doubts and more criticisms, I would do something that it seems like most people who have doubts and criticisms don't do. I would say, well, I assume someone has some kind of answer for it because the faith is still around. I mean, I'm not so smart that I would come up with some doubt that just destroys the faith.
Nobody's ever come up with that doubt before. You did it.
Exactly. And so I would take the extra step and say, all right, well, let me see if there's a satisfactory answer. And each time there was. And you do that hundreds or probably thousands of times, your faith gets stronger.
I want to show the trailer to your movie. And then I want to ask you a question about where I've heard of this before, and yet still it was interesting, and just get your thoughts on that. And then I just want you to kind of, let's walk through some of these things. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, here is the trailer for his film.
For generations, we have been taught that we had to believe the story of the Exodus on faith alone. We were told that Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments, was located in Egypt, but there was no real evidence to make it believable. The Bible says over 70 times that the Israelites went out of Egypt, which would be mostly or entirely modern-day Saudi Arabia. These sites were being kept secret by the Saudi regime that hid them from the world using fences and police and the threat of force. Using contacts we cannot disclose and methods we cannot disclose, we got to the forbidden sites. We were frequently approached by Saudis eager to talk to Americans for the first time. One of the first things they'd say with excitement is, "Did you know Moses was here? Let me show you where he and his people were." Is it true that there is very little evidence that the Exodus story happened, or have we actually just been looking in the wrong spot?
And I first kind of, heard about this through the work of a gentleman named Ron Wyatt, who had been over there in the 70s and 80s. And did he find this same place, but it was just kind of covered up? And I realized that some of Ron's teachings, I was like, I got a hard time with that, but others I'm like, oh, that seems really solid. But did he kind of have this same site, or what were his, I mean, you obviously probably heard of him and know of his work, right?
Sure. So there's a series of people. Basically, I was introduced to it through a video by Bob Cornuke, who was a police officer. And he came after Ron Wyatt, went to the same site, but he was the first one to actually climb up to the mountain. And his presentation, just for my personality, was more effective because just the law enforcement investigative approach. You have to remember, at that time in my life, if you came off as a preacher, I was much less likely to listen to you. So Bob Cornuke reached a certain audience that Ron Wyatt would reach another, and that, I think, was just part of God's plan. But now my friend Joel Richardson has a great book out that goes through old historical sources, not just the Bible, but old historical sources about where Mount Sinai should be. And it really should cause a sea change in how people view the topic, because it becomes very obvious that old historical sources knew where Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia and was writing it and saying it, but tradition took over. So you can make this argument, oh, well, who really found it? None of us found it. It's clear that there were old historical sources that knew where it was. So you can say it was rediscovered, or people brought renewed attention to it. But it's all part of, as I see it, God's plan, because the way it all came together, especially at this moment in time, is just perfect. I mean, think about how well designed the timing of this is, because if we found all this a long time ago, yeah, it would have been nice for people to know about it, but the stuff probably would have been destroyed over this many years if you had all those people coming in. And it's important for mankind to hear about new things being found in our day and age. So it's as if God designed mankind saying, look, I know as technology increases, doubts about the faith is also going to increase. But here's what I got coming. As your technology increases, there's these other things that are going to pop up that are going to provide compelling evidence so that there's an equilibrium between the two. So to me, the timing of how Mount Sinai has been found, in my opinion, and how it happened is just, you couldn't write a better story.
It's divine. It really is. Yeah. I want to share this. A lot of times when people look at or do a Google search for Mount Sinai, if you're familiar with the Red Sea, the two fingers of the Red Sea here, over there, here you have Egypt over here. This is the historical site for Mount Sinai that was given by, and it was Constantine's mother, right? Or mother or mother-in-law. Yes. Yep. That had the dream about that. But you're actually suggesting, and Ron's and these other people are saying, hey, we've actually discovered the real evidence is over here. And I don't know if you have some slides you're going to show, or if you want to have people watch the movie later and see some of the things you're talking about. But let's go through this step by step and go through what made you go, no, it's not here. The research that I'm seeing is sound, and I'm going to do more of it, and it's actually over here on this side.
Sure. So it has to be understood that, especially for those of us in the Western world, a lot of it started with that tradition around 350 AD, when the Catholic tradition started, that Mount Sinai was in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. And it is because no evidence has been found there that you have this mainstream consensus that the Exodus didn't happen. But even among people who don't take the Bible literally, there's all this debate. There's like over a dozen different candidates for where Mount Sinai can be, because hasn't been compelling evidence at any of them except for this one. And it hasn't received mainstream attention because, academics can be snobby. But the old historical sources such as Josephus and many others all basically said that Mount Sinai was the highest mountain outside of the land of Midian, or within Midian, like right on the border. And if you look at old maps, it's clear where Midian was. I mean, at least depending on who you listen to, some will say the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula included Midian. Some people say that to make that old theory fit. But everyone will agree that at least 90% of Midian is northwestern Saudi Arabia. So shouldn't that be the first place you look? Even if you believe that the southern part of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula is included in there, just the odds of looking at it, you should be looking at northwestern Arabia.
So we're talking right over here.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But the evidence, and we talk about this on our website. One of our researchers, Logan, has done a lot of research on this. There's very little evidence that Midian extended over to where the traditional site is. So if you're looking at northwestern Arabia and where Midian was located, specifically the city of Midian, or Madian as it was written, saying the tallest mountain outside of that is very, very clear. It's the Jebel el-Lawz mountain range. And specifically the part that we call Mount Sinai is called Jebel Makla, because we don't need to get too into the weeds, but when someone identifies a mountain, there's multiple peaks. So sometimes there's confusion. But basically it's Jebel el-Lawz, Jebel Makla, right next to each other, part of the same ridge, you could say. And so the instructions on where to find this have been very clear. If we had taken the biblical account as detailed and literally as possible, this probably would have been found a long time ago. And if there was a comprehensive analysis of the old historical sources, it would have been obvious that it's in this location. And the local tradition, before any of us Americans came over there looking for it, the local tradition was very strong there. That, look, Moses here, this is the mountain of Musa, Moses, the Yehud, the Jews were here without any question. They were surprised we didn't know about it. But I guess we could start off with the land of Jethro, because in Islam, there is someone named Shuaib who is their version of Jethro. I mean, most of them won't even dispute that. So it's a biblical character by another name. And in the area near Mount Sinai, they will call it the land of Shuaib, the land of Jethro. There's caves that they'll say are the caves of Jethro. Very, very strong tradition. And that's significant because if it wasn't true, there's no reason for that to be there. There was no financial reason. There was absolutely no incentive for that tradition to exist and be sustained for this long period of time. So something went on. And specifically in the city of Al-Bad, which the old maps and historical sources identify as basically being the city-state of Midian, there is a well. Now, you'll remember in the book of Exodus, when Moses flees Egypt, he meets the daughters of Jethro at a well.
Yeah.
And according to the strong local tradition, that is the well of Musa, the well of Moses. It's on their maps in some cases. And it's clearly a very old well. It's the only well we're aware of in that area. So it's not like you have a bunch of candidates. Like, if this theory is right, like, that almost certainly has to be the well of Moses. Some skeptics will say, oh, well, look at it. The construction around it dates back to, like, I think they say, is it the Ottoman times? But that's because you modernize things. The historical sources record the well being there long before the reconstruction. I think the evidence does, the tradition there is so old in the historical sources that people consider credible for things outside of the Bible say that that's it.
Wow.
So Patterns of Evidence does obviously a great job discussing all sorts of evidence, and they'll come out with one about Mount Sinai. But the story within the borders of Egypt, I would reference people to that film because it does a great job of talking about the evidence of the enslavement there and that sort of thing. So let's skip ahead from Moses being in the land of Jethro to the Red Sea crossing. And Dr. Glenn Fritz, who is an expert on, I forget his exact title, environmental geography. He's got a PhD and real academic type of guy, did what I think is the most robust study and analysis of all the possible Red Sea crossings ever done in history. And he came to a clear conclusion that Nuweiba Beach on the Egyptian side is the most likely crossing point. It's the only one that fits all the criteria. Some people think it's the Straits of Tyran on the southern end of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. I wouldn't rule it out, but I think the evidence really strongly does point towards the Nuweiba land path there.
This is kind of cool. So when you zoom in, you actually have one place along here where it's possible to hold, and I'll let you tell this story, but it's possible to hold like lots of people. And you see this huge, like, get my mouse to work, huge beach area right here. I'm going to zoom in on that while you kind of tell this story. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you did that, because imagine if they had Google Earth 50 years ago or hundreds of years ago. To me, when you look at that body of water, the Gulf of Aqaba, which the Bible pretty clearly from Glenn Fritz's and other studies identify as Yam Suf, the body of water that they crossed. If you're saying, okay, well, where along the Gulf of Aqaba could the Red Sea crossing have happened? If you're looking on Google Earth, doesn't that seem obvious?
It does.
You need to have a beach right on the end where they would be barricaded in, a single path leading to it.
Yeah, look at that. There's one path leading in. They literally go through the mountains like it's described. They go through a path, and they get here. And now, that's what the scripture says, right? They were trapped, mountains on one side, water on the other, Pharaoh's army coming after them.
Yeah, and Josephus and all the other historical sources emphasize this. So the tradition stuck with that in even greater detail, saying, look, there were mountains on all sides and just one path leading to this giant beach, and then they were stuck. And where would they have to end up? In the land of Midian, which is northwestern Arabia. So you put all that together, it becomes obvious, especially with the help of Google Earth, like that's the most likely Red Sea crossing point. Now, if you look at modern underwater maps that have calculated what the land is like under that body of water, there's a land path that is walkable going from that large beach over to the northwestern Arabian coast there. And you can fit millions of people on both sides. So this is really amazing to me. Now, of course, what is in the water is something that we're still trying to do. So in some of the areas...
Hang on. Just in case you didn't catch that. He said possible chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea right here. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And out of all of this is the thing that I doubted most originally, just so people understand. But in researching this, and I was debating not even including this in the film, but then I did enough research. I was like, no, I'm comfortable putting that in there. There are coral encrusted anomalies, and I've talked to a few different divers, the type people who know a lot about it because that's just what they do for fun. And they'll explain that coral will wrap itself around a solid object, like a man-made object or debris of an Egyptian army. And if that material were to go away within the coral could retain its shape. And it's possible that some specks of it could actually still be within the coral depending on different conditions. And so divers have gone in and have seen what has been described as looking like an ancient junkyard where something big went on, pieces everywhere, circular shapes, and they brought down metal detectors and detected circular patterns of metal within those circular pieces of coral. And so they look at that coral and they say, okay, well, what is all this stuff in there? And you can't prove that it's the remains of the Egyptian army. But if you put all these pieces together, the circumstantial case, I think, is very compelling. And this is what has been found with the bare absolute minimum amount of exploration. Imagine what we could do if we actually got some funding for an underwater drone to send people out there. These are all things that we've looked into, but we just don't have the resources yet to actually do. But I'm sure in God's timing, he'll make it happen.
Absolutely. If you were looking for, Pharaoh's chariot in the same way they looked for the Titanic, oh my goodness, what would we be finding over there, right?
Right. And the video and pictures is really just compelling, and the testimony from divers. So that's in my film, but I would also recommend Tim Mahoney's latest film, where he talks to some of the divers who were there and saw some of the stuff, and they describe it. It's really fascinating.
I got to tell you, if you have not gotten on board with the Tim Mahoney series, he's done 3 and just released the 4th one. And this is what Ryan's talking about. Does a great job. And like I said, if you haven't gone through those, he does, and he shows the video evidence in this latest one going into these chariot wheels. Incredible. What did this do for you personally, and what do you hope this does for other people?
Oh, it obviously changed my life in a massive way, beyond anything I could ever imagine. My faith is obviously stronger than it ever has been. And so, I look back on this, and I think even more amazing than seeing these things is the fact that how I got to go there, how I came back safely, repeatedly, that for me on an individual level was the strongest evidence that this is the right spot. And also just for my personal relationship with God and Jesus, it's looking at that. Because there's always going to be some alternative interpretation of something you find on earth.
And you experienced it, that you literally went through this and walked this path, went there, walked those paths, did the research, and now you're going, I got to just tell the world.
Let's focus on just the incredible amount of things that had to happen for this evidence to be preserved. Even the fact that Saudi Arabia is governed by a radical Islamic theocracy. Imagine if they were governed by a Western democracy.
Oh.
We would have trashed that place.
Yeah, seriously. They ended up, God actually protected it through that.
Right, exactly. How ironic is that? That theocratic Sharia law, as horrible as it is, God was even able to use that to preserve all of this evidence so that you can see it today, and it's still being preserved because that certain level of hostility that we all experienced is why it's there. Otherwise, if that level of hostility wasn't there, again, it would have been trashed, it would have been looted, people would have gone there and broken things. So, it's amazing how it's all really worked out, for sure.
Wow. That's awesome. Hey, I want to play the promo for your trip that I've got here. And all of your stuff is available at the Doubting Thomas Research website. And I'd encourage you, sign up, get their updates. I love exposing my friends to people and organizations that I love learning from. And I've enjoyed learning from you, Ryan. This has been really neat.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about it and hopefully meet some new people and that can get involved in going to a tour.
Well, I feel like we're just at a new place because, I'd heard about this through my dad would popularize Ron Wyatt's work quite a bit. And then, of course, Bob Cornuke and then a couple others. And so I heard about it, but it was like, okay, it's kind of interesting. And then when I watched your video, I went, we're at a whole nother level. We're at a whole nother level of exposing this, of talking about this, of being able to do tours over there. I mean, it just kind of blew my mind that, okay, this just went from, yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, that might be it. But, it's kind of shady. We don't know, what we can trust here and there. And to going, okay, we've got it, man. There's, you don't need to be a doubting Thomas about this one anymore.
Right. That's a great way of putting it.
Please take this and share this with other people. Let them know about this truth. And let's just spread this as far as we can. And let's stand bold in our understanding that God is who he says he is. And God will do what God has promised to do. So stand firm on the promises of God. I'm excited about that. All right, I got to do more with you, buddy, because this is fascinating to me. And man, I'd love to talk to you about Islam. I'd love to talk to you about terrorism. There's a lot of stuff I'd love to have conversations with you on, and would love to go to the real Mount Sinai with you. That'd be really.
I look forward to it. Reach out to me anytime.
Sounds good. Ryan, thank you for taking your time and joining us and just sharing with us your story, your journey, your skepticism, your discoveries, and making yourself available to say, hey, I want to teach this. I'll take people over there. Close with your website one more time.
DoubtingThomasResearch.com. And you can also, it's easier to remember, SinaiInArabia.com. The name of the film is Finding the Mountain of Moses.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To view this and many more conversations in their entirety, we invite you to partner with us at creationtoday.org/partner.